Hi there, and welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of whiskey with the love of music. And right now, do you know what time it is? It is 21:12. That's right, 9:12 in the PM, 21:12. All right, maybe a little bit corny, but it fits for our show tonight where we are
Clever.
going to be talking about Rush. Clever. Okay, we'll go with that. How about that? All right. We don't have Benji tonight. He's distilling something somewhere. We don't have Drew tonight. He's got some stuff going on, but we do have two very, very special guests, two people that I know are huge fans of the band Rush. First, I want to introduce Steve Bashore. Welcome, Steve.
Good to be with you, Kevin. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Steve, tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
I work at Mount Vernon and have for the last 15 years, and I'm in charge of the milling and distilling there and also the interpretation of the farm and other elements of basically living history at Mount Vernon.
Wow. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been in the museum business since the early 1990s, so milling since about 95.
Wow.
So historic mills were my first foray into, the field, and then the distillery came much later.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, welcome, Steve. Excited to have you with us. And I know that over the last year or two, we've traded some Rush comments here and there through our next guest, Mr. Alan Bishop.
Hello. How are you?
Doing really well. How about you?
Good. I think thus far.
Good, you think? All right. Well, that's better than I know I'm bad.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's been a good day. So, there's that, and there's not much left of it. So presumably it doesn't go south from here.
All right. Well, okay. I know everyone probably knows already, but Alan, tell people about what you do and introduce yourself as well.
Gotcha. I forgot you were expecting me to be professional for a moment, but yes, no, it's not happening. I metaphorically watch water boil for a living. That is to say that I'm a pot still distiller. So I'm the head alchemist at Spirits of French Lick. And we make, we sort of have four pillars. So bourbon, brandy, botanical spirits, and American whiskeys here in Southern Indiana. I also write for my website, The Alchemist Cabinet, and host the podcast Distillers Talk. And if I'm not distilling, I'm probably thinking about distilling or writing about distilling or reenacting distilling or annoying my wife about distilling or calling Steve or you, one of the two, about distilling. This is pretty much what I do. I just do things. So
you do things, you distill things.
That's right.
All right.
That's right. Really good with ideas, not so great on execution all the time.
Well, it's all got to start with an idea, right?
That's right.
All got to
have
start with
somebody else execute it.
All right. So the idea tonight is we're just going to talk about Rush and what the band means to us. This is the 10th anniversary of the release of Rush's final studio album, Clockwork Angels, and we will talk about that album specifically a little bit tonight, as well as a few others. And then we'll just kind of see where the conversation goes with these guys, because I know that they've been big fans of the band for a long time, as well as being very creative, very well-respected men in the distilling industry as well. So one of the things we want to do tonight and share with everybody is our pairings of certain spirits with certain songs or albums by Rush. So Alan, I'm going to kick it to you first to start us off on this, because I think this was your idea. So tell us what you've got.
Yeah. So obviously anybody that kind of follows what I do knows that absinthe is sort of one of my go-tos, absinthe and apple brandy. And I've been a huge Rush fan for pretty much the entirety of my life. So I've always loved pairing music and drinks together, and especially creating drinks based off of music. So this is a project that I've been playing around with as a prototype. It's an amethyst style absinthe, which is a sort of an Americanized absinthe, if you will, that uses a purple corn variety for that beautiful amethyst color. And so my first pairing that I have here is that amethyst absinthe that's been loosed down with some water. And I'm going to go with Xanadu on that, because I think it fits.
I can't argue with that. I think that does absolutely fit. And
you can for sure at least get like 3 glasses of absinthe down during Xanadu, for sure. Right. By the end of it, the song means something entirely different.
Well, 2.5, and then you don't remember how the song ends, I think.
Yes.
All right, I love it. Steve, how about you, buddy?
Well, it's hard to link up some of the bourbons with Rush. Yeah, I didn't want to just think about Canadian rye and Rush. So I decided just to go with a Four Roses single barrel, just a high quality, just like the band was. I couldn't link it to any particular song, actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't think we can argue with that either. Definitely a high quality, well-made, complex whiskey, and that does fit the band.
Absolutely.
So Tim is in the chat, and he is saying he's enjoying some Spirits of French Lick, Whiskey Witch, and Witch Hunt. There you go.
Fantastic.
Very nice, Tim. Thanks.
One
for playing along.
Favorite Rush songs actually is Witch Hunt.
Is okay, and I'm probably jumping way ahead, but there are a lot of Rush songs that are still obviously very relevant. I don't know that any is maybe more relevant today than Witch Hunt, but that may be a conversation for later in the show. But like Tim, feel free to play at home, and we'll keep this thing rolling with everybody. For myself, I have, and I'm not to suck up to one of our guests, but I've got this Lee W. Sinclair. Horrible choice. Okay. Horrible choice.
Terrible name for a whiskey.
From the man who distilled it himself. Nobody in the, Geddy Lee. Okay. So Lee, anyway, I'll tell you this, the reason I picked that and the song is that I would pair with it is Spirit of Radio is, I've used to write a whole lot more than I do now, but over the last few years, I've written several articles regarding different whiskeys and such. And with every article that I've written about Alan or what he's doing at French Lick, it's had a Rush Easter egg, if you will, hidden within the article. Some hidden better than others, but the spirit ever lingers. So, gentlemen, cheers.
Cheers.
Well played.
All right, well, we're going to try to bring a couple more of those to you as we go through the show. Jay Tyler's also playing at home. He's having Wild Turkey 101 Rye, but he doesn't tell us what song to pair that with. But okay, 101 Rye, that's a good whiskey. I like it.
So that's a working man's whiskey right there.
There you go. See, and Jay, you just got an assist from Alan Bishop on that. Okay, speaking of assist, we want to share something with you tonight that is going on this weekend. Alan, tell everybody about Pioneer Village.
Yeah, so this coming weekend at the Pioneer Village at Spring Mill State Park here in Southern Indiana, in Mitchell, Indiana, Lawrence County, we are having the first ever Indiana Craft Tasting Festival, basically. So we have several distilleries that'll be there. Spirits of French Lick, Hard Truth, Donham Day, Old 55. I believe MGP is also going to be there, which is pretty cool because they went out of their way to actually be a part of this and support the history of it. And the way it'll be set up is we have this really cool Pioneer Village, which is a living history village. And there are a number of different buildings there, some original to the mill area, to the original town that was there, some that were brought in later on. And of course, they all have their own little, cottage industry sort of set up. There's obviously the mill there as well. There's a distillery, there's a tavern, there's basically an inn, etc. So all those sort of things, and each distillery will have their own building that they will be in serving their spirits, which is kind of their area to sort of personalize and make their own thing to be able to enjoy those spirits amongst the ghost of the era, as it were. But as well, the reason that we're actually having this festival is because Spring Mill, I've been working with them, the Indiana DNR now for probably 3+ years, trying to invest some time, money, and effort into the historic distillery, the old Daisy Spring Mill distillery that operated on the property. It was actually the very last operating industry there within the village, operating up into the 1890s, even after the mill and everything else closed and basically been abandoned. It was sort of, for its time, it was a well-known distillery for Southern Indiana, making both apple brandy and whiskey of various types, and even a little bit of grape brandy, believe it or not, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around in Southern Indiana in the 1800s. but it's sort of a kind of a spiritual pilgrimage place for me to be able to tell the story of Daisy Spring Mill Distillery, the history that it had, the distiller who worked there at one point in time, Mr. William Dalton, who we named a whiskey after, who was the longest tenured distiller in Indiana state history. And the goal is that what we are currently doing is Spring Mill has on site the original distilling building that's still standing. It's one of 3 existing structures from 155 plus in a 6-county region that still exists, with the original 100-gallon pot for their pot still, as well as an original barrel brand and a couple of original hogshead style fermenters. So it's the largest collection of sort of in situ distilling equipment from that era of Southern Indiana distilling that I'm aware of. So we're preserving that, making a museum on one side of the old distillery building, hoping to get other donations from people who have things sort of packed away in their barn that they've been holding on to that maybe they'd be willing to share with the public. And then the other side will actually end up being initially a reenactment distillery with a 130-gallon pot still, another 30-gallon pot still, 100-gallon wash boiler, where we'll be able to talk about that history of distilling and sort of demonstrate mash-ins. And hopefully within the next year or so, it will become a fully functional distillery selling whiskeys, brandies, and other spirits that would have made sense for Southern Indiana at that time, whether they were ever made there in that particular facility or not, to raise money for Spring Mill.
Fantastic. That's a huge project for the area, and speaks a ton to the history side of things. And
well, and a big thanks to Steve Bashore and Lisa Wicker on that, because had I not had the chance to go out to Mount Vernon and spend some time with them, it probably wouldn't have been brave enough to sort of pursue that project and try to push it to the forefront, especially it's an odd thing. It'll be the very first ever that we are aware of state-owned distillery in the United States, which sometimes can be a little bit of a communication hassle, but we're going to figure it out. So.
Very good. Well, thanks for doing that. Thanks for your work on that. It's obviously going to help preserve a lot of history in that area and push that forward, something that everybody can latch onto and learn from for hopefully generations to come.
Expand that mill story and put the distilling back in the history books. That's the goal.
Yeah.
Awesome. So be sure to try to make it out and to Pioneer Village this weekend. And
I also make sure you have to call ahead and pre-register. I should have mentioned that as well. I apologize. The other part of that is you do have to have a designated driver. Of course, they're not going to be doing breathalyzers or anything like that, but I'm sure they're going to want to know that you have somebody with you that's going to get you home. And I will be speaking in the distillery that day on the history of distilling as well, just sort of casually as people walk in, whatever they want to talk about or hear about, I'm glad to tell them. So.
Awesome. All right. Well, that sounds like a great time, and hope everything is as successful as it sounds like it will be. So we're going to move into some more format here. I did want to share one more thing. Jay said that he is taking, Tim says, Wild Turkey 1 Rye and Presto. All right. So again, Jay, you've got more suggestions on what to pair with your Wild Turkey 101 Rye.
Nice.
All right. So we're going to talk about how we got into Rush, and when and what drew us to the band. So Steve, let's start with you. What got you into this band?
Well, I think at the time, when I was in high school, Led Zeppelin was still around, and they were going to go on tour. I remember when Bonham died, and so Rush was another hard rock band that people either loved them or hated them. And in the early years, I think some of it was Geddy's vocals were, that high end pitch that he had, but the musicianship was so incredible. And I really liked Rush, but I think at that time period, 79, Permanent Waves era, that was huge when I was young. And then, of course, Moving Pictures. And I wish I'd have seen them, and I had a chance in 81 and didn't. And so it wasn't really till the Power Windows album that I got to see him. But I remember once you discover an album too like that, you start to go through the catalog. And I've always loved guitar. And of course, the drumming of Neil is unsurpassed. He's, you can argue about who was the best, but just incredible work. And then add the lyrics. I'm a rather much love lyrics myself. And so the type of writing that went on. It's kind of a thinking man's band.
Mm-hmm.
And so the combination just, even though it's pretty young, it hits you back then. And of course, Working Man was good, but I kind of tend to I think Permanent Waves is what did it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that probably did it for a lot of people. Alan, how about yourself?
Sort of a twofold thing, I guess. So they're one of the very earliest bands that I remember hearing on the radio. So growing up on a tobacco farm and then also doing the illicit distilling thing with my family, the radio was always on continuously. And of course, Dad had a nice stereo system too. Although Dad wasn't a huge Rush fan. He is now. I think I converted. It happened backwards. I converted him. So obviously, Spirit of Radio. That one always to me was like, you get excited when it came on, even as a kid, when that came on when we were working. For some reason, it always had a special sort of meaning to it. And that bass line in particular, I still to this day, when I listen to that song, that's what I'm listening to, is that bass line in particular.
Yeah.
So that was probably the earliest memory. But then when I was maybe 10 or 11, I think I got the Delinquent Philosopher's Starter Pack, which was my dad was so tired of hearing Black Sabbath Paranoid and Rush Tom Sawyer that I got Moving Pictures and Paranoid sort of thrown at me because I'd just gotten a stereo and I had nothing to play on my stereo. So, he inadvertently got me hooked on the two bands that weren't apparently within his wheelhouse that he was willing to listen to on a repeated basis, and subsequently became obsessed with both of them.
Yeah.
So Moving Pictures was definitely the first album. And then, obviously growing up in the 90s, I think basically, had a subscription to Columbia House, and what is 10 CDs for a dime or whatever it was,
Right.
Cool.
And
I can buy the whole.
Yeah, and then you have to buy CDs the rest of your life.
Right.
Exactly. They still send me stuff and they're not even in business. Right. But yeah, I think from there, I just bought like everything. I think it's literally what I used all that on was Black Sabbath and Rush.
Yeah.
And then for me, that the first one that was really mine was very much so Counterparts. So.
Well, I also had an experience in college when I hadn't seen them yet. Knew this family. I was living out in Utah at the time, and there were 6 kids in the family, and they all were good musicians. And one of the younger brothers, the sister, said, "You got to meet Kenny. He loves Rush. You got to see Kenny." He was 17, and this kid had perfect pitch. So you'd be at his house, and he's figuring out Alex Lifeson solos in front of you, and he kept saying to me, "You got to go." So he took me at Salt Palace in Salt Lake City, and we were on the side where Lifeson was, and that's where to see him, craft those chord landscapes that he does.
Yeah.
In addition to the uniqueness of the guitar solos, which is way outside the bounds of pentatonic minor scales. I mean, I look at his solos like abstract art because there's strange harmonics and chordal progressions, and then he can always rip when he needs to. It's just a unique style all his own. So he blew me away that night. That was getting blown away live by Lifeson.
Yeah.
Did it for me even more.
One of my favorite things, and this isn't an album, but for a long time, and I've still got tons of them. For a long time, when I was really, really into Rush, big time, some of those 80s albums, the late 80s albums, which I'm sure we'll get into, they really leaned into the synth and all that stuff, and you could tell that took a little bit of a toll on Alex, who I think takes up a little bit of a beating, anyways, as being considered by the general public maybe the lesser of the 3 musicians, although he isn't, obviously. But I got on this habit of buying post Roll the Bones live bootlegs. That's a distinctly Rush and Grateful Dead thing, right? There's nobody else doing that. And I bought them because you could hear how happy Alex was when he played, right? You could tell that something had changed dynamically in the band, and there's a difference in the way that he was playing live on those shows. And I can pop a lot of those shows in now and listen to them and still hear it and still see exactly his thought process is already going through. I know where we're headed now. Now it's my turn.
Right.
We're done with the synth thing for a while. So.
Right.
Yeah, that was a tough period. He's written about that, and I've seen him interviewed. There was a discussion about that direction, and there are 3 guys that compromise with each other, though.
Yeah.
And, and then in those later albums, when he switched back to Les Pauls that he had customized with a locking tremolo bridge, there's some heavy Gibson sounds in the later stuff. Because he always had the white 335, which I think was a 66, but I'm not sure. But some of those earlier albums, you see those guitars. Then he went into that period you're talking about, Alan, where there was a lot of I don't know if they were Charvel or Jacksons or what they were, but they were single coil pickups and kind of lighter on texture. And I guess he was trying to fit with what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always wondered too. You remember whenever they were really at the very end of that 80s thing, right? And a show of hands, which is not by far not my favorite of their live albums because it is in that synth era, right? And you can kind of pick up on that, I think. But that a band potentially, and a guitar player in particular, probably has at least some moment where they're like, this might be the right direction when you're playing a headless guitar made by Hamer, right? There's just a little,
right,
a little questionability there, I think. So you pair that with a bad mullet, and it's game over.
They always had weird fashion to them, though. Look at some of the robes on the back of the early albums and stuff. In one of the later retrospective DVDs, they laugh at themselves pretty well about. They didn't know what to do. They were trying to find a look, And,
I think especially if you look at 2112, they were trying to make characters, and I think that they're like every other young guy is, right? Where you're having that conversation with your brothers, and you're like, it'd be really cool if we made this into a character thing, and we really played into it. And then looking back on it in hindsight, what a great theatrical record, and what a terrible fashion statement in general. Right. But luckily, they never stuck to that kind of thing.
The kimonos, kimono look was not great, but
iconic now. Now you can call it iconic.
Yeah.
Yes,
or ironic.
Yeah.
All right. So this is Dave Ewald's his first live concert.
Wow, early too, 76.
Rush in 76.
Wow,
Dave. You've always been my hero. Now you're just even more so.
Stepped it up.
That is something else. For myself, I mean, I grew up, from I guess middle school, knowing of Rush. I knew the hits, Tom Sawyer and Limelight and that kind of thing, but didn't really get big into the band until, oddly enough, Power Windows album. Which is kind of an odd place to jump in, but I guess you just jump in where you do. And then, just start digging backwards from there, and then just trying to keep up going forward. And so, a lot of the songs off that Power Windows album still are kind of near and dear to me because that's where I found the band. Like Marathon is one of my favorite Rush songs. I think that lyrically it tells a great story, and it's one that I'd still listen to quite a bit today. I'll still play that whole album several times a year. So,
nice.
So we've kind of touched on a little bit, but talk a little bit more about what makes Rush special. How are they different?
Well,
I think.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead, man.
I was going to say, much like Absinthe, it's a holy triumvirate, right? It's in the words of Jason Segel, right? There's something special to power trios to begin with, especially if they're good. Right, and I think that it's some combination of the idea that less is more, right? But it's also not ego driven, where it's one person. It's three people. There's three options that you go to, and three levels of compromise that you go through, and they all, to me, with Rush in particular, it's always felt like after that first album, obviously, they were all three challenging each other. Like, where can we take this thing to next,
right.
and how can we change it? How can we make it different? How can we challenge ourselves? Because we're competing with ourselves, right? And I think that's really the beauty of it. The other part of it is, Neil Peart can range lyrically back and forth, between some pretty heady, emotional, sort of landscapes also into that sci-fi thing and back. And so, you can find yourself, if you're in a very serious emotional mood, you can find that in Rush's music. And if you're in one of those moods where you want to hear about drinking the milk of paradise, then you can go there pretty easily as well. And there's a little of all that. And I think that that's very special because it speaks to the crowd that obviously has traditionally been Rush's crowd, going back to their heyday in the late 70s there, kind of the Dungeons and Dragons crowd. But those tend to be the people that can be a little bit more emotional and maybe more in touch with those sorts of things. So
right.
I think that the thing with Rush overall that really makes them special is if you love Rush is specifically talking to you and for you. It's your band, right? And it doesn't matter if anyone else likes them. To you, they're your band. That's what it's part of your life in a way that a lot of other music, even if you love it, doesn't become that.
Yeah, and I would add that the trios you think of, obviously Cream and bands like that, but they're in that mold, but they're so it was a new sound, and then you have three virtuosos. And I remember in one of the retrospectives DVDs again, they talked about when Neil auditioned, and Alex says, he didn't look cool enough to be in this band. And they heard him play, and he was pulling off triplets and stuff, and they're like, yeah, he's the one.
Yep.
And I think they just found the right they gelled like any good thing does. It's going to gel, and then it took them places. And then I love the way they, over time, you listen to those albums, they could recreate them live. And a lot of bands like Zeppelin live was a different show.
Absolutely.
And then you hear them, and because the foot pedals, and sometimes when Geddy's on keyboards, Alex is playing bass foot pedals, and they were able to really hit most of that music note for note each night, which is pretty impressive. Because a lot of bands, it's a different thing live, but different band totally. But Leonard Skinner was like that. They played those solos night for night, note for note, each time they played them. So I just think it's the musicianship, and then I love, as I said earlier, words. So Neil's writing really, when you're a young guy, really hits you. And I remember Free Will, or Natural Science, some of those songs on that album, and of course for everybody at that time, I was at like a sophomore, junior in high school or something when Tom Sawyer comes out, that's going to speak to young men particularly. And he was such a well-read man, and it came through in his writing. And you look at the people that write a lot of words, they read a lot of words, they read a lot of things, and that helps feed it. So those stories of them backstage not partying, but Neil's reading a book in the hotel room. They were different than the other bands on the road in the 70s. That's for sure.
Right. I remember a story where where Gene Simmons is talking about when Rush was opening for them for Kiss, and he said, every night we're having parties in our rooms at the hotel, and they could have any woman they wanted, but they're all, in their rooms and reading books, and so they were a different breed in that regard, and I think there's a humility to the band that I think comes through in their work and in their performances. It's tough to pull off the lyrics that Neil writes and not come across as being kind of pompous if you're not truly humble. And I think that humility, that self-questioning that comes through in some of these very, very deep lyrics is something that connects to people, especially, a lot of times the people that really latched on to Rush when they were younger are people that were kind of like the band. They didn't necessarily fit like everybody else. And you can look at while it was a little bit later in the career of the band, Subdivisions is a song that's completely about that. And I think that kind of draws people into the band, and of course the fact that they're all just remarkable musicians, but they recognize each other and they give each other room to breathe and to play and explore and be creative in what they're doing, which I think it's obviously not the case with most bands because they just don't last.
No.
And Rush obviously has.
But I think another part of that too, and Steve touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's another one of those things that kind of gets overlooked too, is the tone of Geddy's voice, right? And obviously early on and even to this day, there's a lot of people that they're not going to get into Rush because they don't like Geddy's voice, and that's fine. But what I would say is that gets overlooked in some ways because of the vocal range that Geddy has and has had in the past, and having to change it some over the years. There's an honesty that comes through when he's singing Neil's lyrics as well, right? Because he can only sing them in his voice, and his voice is very distinct. It's very different. It's not what I would classify obviously as a pretty voice, but it's an honest voice, and it's truthful when he's singing those words, right? Because it's the only place that's the only vocal sort of talent that he kind of can approach things from, is from, this is what I sound like, this is what my voice is. So there's an honesty to that too that I think draws a lot of fans into it, right? At least for me, that's always been a huge part of it, I think.
Yeah, and I've often marveled at how some of those lyrics he wrote as they're working on music, how they could arrange those songs.
Yeah.
It's I can't imagine, because it's not your 4/4 beat and your, and you said the time signature changes on a lot of their stuff where it just goes incredible places. But they were so tight, and I think about for Geddy and Alex growing up together and playing together. There's no substitute for that for young musicians that are bonded like that at a young age. Yeah, and Neil was the perfect fit.
What's really crazy too, I was listening the other day, and you can find some of them on YouTube. I was listening to some isolated bass tracks from Geddy. And just listen to the way that, obviously if you're listening to the whole track or you go watch him live, you can pay a little more attention to it. But listening to those isolated tracks is pretty interesting. And figuring out exactly what he's playing, when he's playing, and clearly playing off of Neil, but also occasionally playing off of Alex. And the way that he's playing, and it's almost impossible for me to imagine the way that he's playing and singing at the same time, right? It's not like strumming a guitar. And you go listen to those isolated tracks, and you can hear how hard and how forcefully he's hitting the bass, and especially playing with his fingers. It literally sounds like the guy's ripping his fingers off as he's playing. Even on the studio albums, he's literally just slapping that bass. It's a whole thing. But I bet I listened to 15 different isolated tracks all the way through, because it was just interesting to hear how he was filling those voids in that 3-piece band.
Yeah, it's a wall of sound. It's unbelievable. And then in between the lyrical lines, often there's bass solo riffs, for want of a better word. He's adding another layer of melody to that music. And there's nothing like it. I just, was so glad I got to see him a few times over the years, because once you see him once, you want to go back. You will go back. And I remember one time out here in Manassas, and probably 15, 16 years ago, maybe, they were playing at this amphitheater not far from me, and I just went down there to the ticket office and see if they had any singles, and I ended up 10th row right in front of Alex Lifeson, by myself. It's like, it was perfect. And you want to see it up close, you want to see how he does it. Yeah. And it's incredible to watch him play.
That's how when a band and a TV show has infiltrated popular culture, even when they were previously counterculture, was, when they came back and came back from their hiatus after everything that happened to Neil's family. Went to go see him up in Indianapolis, and it was actually me and my mom and my dad and one of my friends from school. And my friend from school could just nail the Eric Cartman voice to a T. And we were in the parking lot afterwards, and of course he's screwing around and doing the Eric Cartman thing and doing the Tom Sawyer thing. You'd be surprised how many people can do the Eric Cartman Tom Sawyer voice, and just how moving it is to hear that many Eric Cartmans sing Tom Sawyer in the parking lot after a Rush concert. Yeah. A little disturbing as well.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Hang on, I think I've
Yeah,
got
what
it.
happened to Neil was something. I remember that time. Death's a hard thing, but when it comes in twos, it's the worst. And I remember how he took that long motorcycle journey, even rode through China, I believe.
Yep.
And he had nicknames for each other, I recall, and he'd drop a postcard in the mail with one of their phrases or nicknames just to let him know he was okay. And Getty talks about that. Just glad to get a card every so many weeks or months to know he was all right. And, at that time, I never knew if he wanted to play again.
Yeah. Well, the motorcycle thing just in general. And again, on Neil in general, just the kind of interesting guy he was. You mentioned the books earlier, and then the motorcycle came later. And in between, it was bicycle, right? These guys are playing shows. They're on tour, and he's having them drop him off at a town, a 4-hour bicycle ride away. He's riding his bicycle to the damn show and then playing drums.
Right.
All right, overachiever.
Hey, here's the South Park thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, there was that. And then there was the short intro from the show too. Did you guys ever see that where they actually did a intro from South Park for the Rush show, the Tom Sawyer thing?
Yeah.
Yep. We also did that thing on the later tours where they dressed up and they're working at a diner and their band was Rash.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Rash.
So,
Alex
let me throw this up here for just a second, because everybody that Rush has that image of being very serious and thoughtful, but these guys had a big sense of humor, and the center photo is the band Rash, which was a clip at the beginning of the Time Machine tour.
Right.
And then up in the top left, you've got Getty singing with Bob and Doug McKenzie, Take Off to the Great White North. You have
In Search of Beer. Yeah.
Yes. And then the bottom left is a movie near and dear to Alan's heart, I Love You, Man. And which I actually watched a couple weeks ago as part of show research. And I was saying how much I liked it, and Steve was saying that I must be drunk. And then the bottom right is Alex on Trailer Park Boys.
Trailer Park Boys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these guys had a very good sense of humor in general, but they also had a very good sense of humor about themselves.
Yeah. Well, if you've seen, I think I sent that to you guys that several years back, they did that Rush having dinner talking about it in the studio, and you just see their personalities. Alex is just unreal. He's hilarious. And so it's fun to watch those with Neil gone and just remember the dynamic and that they were three friends to begin with, and that's probably why they lasted,
Yeah.
There was a video, and Steve, you may have sent it to me first. I know I sent it on to one of mine and Kevin's groups, but or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Kevin, you sent it. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the video of Alex with his parents when he's talking about quitting school and becoming a musician.
Yeah.
That's how crazy is that video even exists?
I know that it survived. And the thing about it is, with Alex and Getty's family background, Eastern Europeans, and, Red Sector A that Neil wrote about the Holocaust, which affected Getty's family terribly. They were told, you got to get an education, got to get a job, because it's understandable from those people's life experiences. Right. So there you see a 17-year-old kid go, no, I'm going to play guitar. And it's like people that say, I'm going to be in the NFL. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
Right.
How many slots are there, or the NBA?
Right. So I'm going to be a distiller. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey,
well, there's more slots now than there were 25 years ago.
Some of us became distillers because we weren't good enough to be musicians full time, Kevin. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Follow your path. Follow your path. So
until you fall off of it.
Yes. Let's go to our second pour, matching something from the spirits world to something from Rush. And I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and go. I'm going to go first this time. And this is kind of, well, music should be personal. At some level, music should be personal. And about a year ago, actually, it was right at a year ago, June 6th, 2021, my mom entered the hospital again. And I drove down late on a Sunday night to Knoxville to see her in the hospital. And as I'm driving down, I stop for gas, and I see there's a liquor store next door to the gas station, and I stop in there to see what they've got, but didn't want to spend a whole lot of time. And so the first thing that I found was this a bottle. If I get it on this in the shot, a bottle of Old Tub, and so I got this little 375 of Old Tub and drove on down. Went to see Mom in the hospital, and then went back to their house that night and sat on the porch and was just listening to Rush the whole drive down. And a song came on that I hadn't heard in a long time, and it was off the Vapor Trails album. It was a song called Secret Touch, and one of the lyrics is "The way out is the way in." And whether Neil meant the lyric to mean this or not, at the time, I saw it as the way out of this life is the way into the next life, for Mom. And it was actually a year ago today that we took her off cancer meds, and she got better and started feeling good for a few months, and she did pass in October. But the song Secret Touch and Old Tub for those very personal reasons that no one else would ever connect is my second pairing of Rush to a whiskey. So that's mine.
That's
Alan,
awesome.
how about you, sir?
So I'm going to tie a couple things together here. So at the time period when I was moonshining on a larger level than I should have been, and people were sort of figuring out that I was doing that, and Kim was at the same time saying, you need to go get a job doing this. My rebellious streak was saying, no, you don't. You don't need to go do this. And honestly, short of Lisa Wicker and Steve Beam influencing me, the other thing that influenced me was I was drinking some moonshine one night and doing some woodworking projects, and I was listening to 2112, and Discovery, of all things, is the thing that really pushed me to go and try to find something. You know, that idea of doing something new and finding something new that's also old, even though I knew distilling, going into the legal side of it was, I guess it was always kind of bred into me that that's not what we do. So that being said, old habits occasionally die hard. And sometimes you just have to make some kind of prototypical stuff. So a very good friend of mine in the Great White North sent me illegally a bunch of Rush beer from Canada. Don't ask me how it got here, but it got here. And it's an excellent beer, by the way, if you guys haven't had it. Unfortunately, it's not distributed in the U.S. as far as I know, but I had to kind of take that to the next level. And I even tagged Rush, the Rush account, on social media to let them know that I fixed their beer and I turned it into proper Rush Canadian whiskey, all the way down to the proofing water is actually just slightly boiled down maple sap. I mean, it doesn't get any more Canadian than that, even if it is Hoosier maple sap. That's a true Canadian whiskey via Hoosier land right there, if one ever existed. So that's Rush Fly By Night whiskey. Awesome. That's what that is. So it turned out really well.
I thought you were going to next add that you drop a little Canadian bacon in it overnight and let it.
You know, I might have to give Amsey Winning a little sample to make some smoked bacon out of. That could be a possibility. The hops are just interesting enough in there from a kind of citrus point of view that could work.
Yeah, it'd be a good morning drink. So.
Yes. Good. Nothing else is happening today. Drink.
Yeah. So, Steve, what else do you have?
Well, I got the A. Smith Bowman Pioneer Spirit Cask Strength. Yeah. And, we've worked with Joe Dangler over the years, who used to be the master distiller at A. Smith Bowman, and he's helped us a lot at Mount Vernon. So always enjoy what they make there. And Brian Pruitt is the more recent master distiller, although he's moving to Kentucky. But I just think Cask Strength says something about the power of the band, just like we were talking about the musicianship. And, to hear some of those heavier tracks, it's just it made me think of that type of whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely. Fits. Cheers, gentlemen.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
I'll throw this out there for the two of you, just for funsies. So I'm not a great musician. I'm not even particularly a good musician, and I'm a way worse singer. But there are two voices that I will try to imitate very badly whenever I'm on my own in the car.
Mm-hmm.
Geddy Lee is one and Dio is the other, and I'm not good at either of them. Just going to throw that out there.
I just had this big flash of you singing "Holy Diver." I don't know.
It's happened many times on the way to work, buddy. I know every word to that song.
Yeah. Is that Vivian Campbell back then with Dio?
Yep.
In the early days? Yeah.
Great stuff, too.
You couldn't pick anybody that's actually easy to imitate, could you?
With Dio, you just throw a lot of oohs and ahs in there and you'll be okay. You gotta theater it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
well, we talked a little bit about Geddy's voice earlier. The guy has a 3-octave range and perfect pitch back before auto-tune. So the tonal quality, or the wailing, as some people call it, may not be your cup of tea, but the guy's got talent, and that voice definitely fits the band. Could you imagine a different lead singer for Rush?
Imagine anybody else in the world singing Closer to the Heart. Anybody. Doesn't matter who it is, really.
Well, they're one of those bands that people try to do them. It just ruins it. There's certain groups that, there's certain Beatles songs that would be easier to play than others. And like Chris Cornell does an incredible job on playing acoustic Beatles tracks. You got to look that up if you haven't listened to some of that acoustic work. But, we've all seen it where it's like, oh, please don't try to copy that song. I don't know how anybody could copy Rush in total.
Right.
Although there's some, and you've seen them on YouTube, there's a couple of these bands. One of them has a female singer where they're incredibly close. It's pretty amazing. But hard to match.
But you also have Rush did that covers album, Feedback.
Yes.
And which I thought was interesting, but Geddy's voice doesn't fit those songs.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun. It's fun to hear them playing things, like Crossroads and stuff. But it just doesn't feel right. Something's off.
Yeah, you have, what's off is you have to have grown up in Canada where the sun comes out once a year. And you'll accept whatever cover version you get at the school dance, right?
Yeah.
And be happy with it. So no, I agree with you though. That one was not I'd forgotten about that covers album until you mentioned it just then. Truthfully.
Yeah, me too. I'd forgotten.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a few of the albums. Let's talk a little bit about Clockwork Angels first. This album came out 10 years ago this week, and was the first Rush true concept album from beginning to end, and was the final studio album by Rush, unfortunately. So Steve, what are your thoughts on Clockwork Angels?
I enjoyed it, that era. We talked about the synth era and stuff, which there's songs in there I do like, but this felt like they were coming back into some of the other sounds we all loved. And I remember seeing them on that tour. Mm-hmm. And you always go to see the older songs, really, but I thought that there was a lot of good material on it. And the thing people forget, about, I think, musicians, and we love bands in certain eras, but for them, it's their writing and creating. So, people get upset sometimes when bands sound different or do something different. They're human beings trying to create something, and they're not going to, like Jack Bruce, when he was interviewed about the Cream reunion at Albert Hall in 2005, he said, it wouldn't be any good to be a tribute band to yourself, and
right.
I think they needed to write for their own sakes. And so sometimes maybe we don't all like certain albums, but you got to think of them as creative artists, and they would have stagnated if they hadn't continued to write. But I enjoyed this album. I really did.
Yep. Alan?
So to be honest, I struggle with that album. I loved seeing the tour. And I told Kevin earlier, I talked to him, I even re-listened to that album this past week to try to give it a fair shake. And it's not that it's a bad album. There's songs on there that I really like. I enjoy what they were trying to do. The real problem, and it took me a little while to put my finger on this, and honestly, Kevin, that's why I called you about it earlier. I was trying to figure out why I react to that album the way that I do, because for all intents and purposes, it has the kind of sound that typically I would like, especially when it comes to those kind of big, heavy guitar riffs, the really heavy bass tone, how heavy the bass is in the mix, how much towards the forefront that it is. And I finally figured out what it was. It's a great album. It was a great idea. It was a great concept as far as that stuff goes. The problem I think I really have with it is, again, my era with Rush was coming into it in the 90s. But the problem that I have here is this album feels like it leans on those 90s albums really hard, which is not a bad thing, but it also doesn't feel like it's necessarily a step forward, right? And I think that there's some amount of, Neil even, I think, hinted around to that to some degree with, everything that was going on with him with, the idea of losing it and all that sort of stuff as well. It can't always be easy when it's also the same three guys that you've been with forever. And maybe you've got things going on that you're not dealing with. And truthfully, to be fair, as I told you earlier in our conversation, Kevin, maybe I'll come back to that album 5 years from now and I'll love it. Because another example, not to keep coming back to Black Sabbath, but that last album that Sabbath did with Dio, to me, it sounded exactly like the Humanizer. And the first time I heard it, I didn't like it. And it took 5 or 6 years before I came back to it and said, okay, I get it. It makes sense. It's okay. But I think with Rush, I have that thing where I'm like, I think I maybe expected them to go beyond what that album to me sounds like sonically. So,
during one of those latter tours, I have a good friend, Bob Mosier, that I've known since probably 7th grade. And he loves Rush and he plays bass. And we were there and one of these shows, and they were doing, from new back to old, going back in time. So about 7 songs in, Bob leans over to me and says, "How about playing some Rush?" And I knew what he meant, but he wanted to get back to,
right.
3 and 4, And I just said to him, "They're coming, Bob. They're going in reverse here. They're coming."
Yeah.
Right.
But by the same token, like I said before, they had for themselves to change. Everybody changes. And so,
absolutely.
And had they made more albums, it would have been interesting to see what developed, because there's no doubt there was more juice in the tank, and you can see Alex and Getty talking about it, even though, there's recent interviews, a really good one recently when they talked about how they had to be quiet for Neil's sake. And, they knew it was over, but couldn't say anything. And that, they left a lot on the table. Both of them wanted to play, but, it intervened with illness, which was a terrible thing.
That was a fantastic interview too, all the way down to, you guys played music together. No, we talk about it when we get together, but we get drunk before we make it to the basement.
Yeah.
So
I felt like they needed that interview. I thought that guy did a great interview.
Yeah, absolutely.
I forget the show, but maybe you can link it up there, Kevin, because everybody listening really should take the time, because it catches you up on what happened and kind of where they are now.
Yeah. To me, the Clockwork Angels album it's honestly one of my favorite Rush albums, and I think from a music standpoint, all 3 guys I think are in peak form, and from a lyric standpoint, I think that it's some of Neil's best work since maybe the Counterparts album. And okay, Alan, this is the Alchemy album. Okay,
oh, I know.
This is the Alchemy album. I mean, look, the whole clock is all alchemy symbols and stuff. And I thought, well, Alan will get into that, and but
And again, it's not bad. I think for me, it's more a matter of like, I expected them to push the boundaries sonically a little further out and into a different genre than where it landed, I think. So,
well, it's one of my favorites, and I've listened to it many times, and you know, and there's probably a little bit of nostalgia about it being the last studio album from the band. That probably plays a little bit into my affectation for it as well. But I just think from beginning to end, and the song "The Garden" is a very fitting end to the Rush studio album era. So, and I'll touch on that as we get towards the end of the show. But you know, 10 years since we've had a studio album from Rush, and again, I thought it was a really solid effort. So let's talk also about 2112 and get your opinions on that. It doesn't sound like any of us really started at 2112. Alan, you may not have even been alive at that point.
Nope.
But what
by osmosis via marijuana smoke, there's probably some genetic memory.
Well, to set this up just a little bit, the album before it was Caress of Steel, and that album did not perform well. There are a lot of songs on that album that I enjoy, but at the time, that album was not successful at all. And when they went out on tour, they called it the Down the Tubes tour because they'd show up in cities and they'd have 50 people show up, and it was not going well, and the studio was putting pressure on them to record music that was more mainstream, that had hit singles, that could be promoted more easily than
it was a lot like releasing a white bourbon whiskey.
yes, it could be like that, sure. But the band had to make a decision. Are we going to conform to the wishes of the studio and start making things that are more radio friendly, or are we going to do what we want to do? And fortunately for all of us, they decided they were going to do what they were going to do, and kind of doubled down on the whole concept that they had created for the band, and thus 2112 was born. So
that opening, I mean, we all probably remember the first time you heard that opening part of that album.
Yeah.
And then Passage to Bangkok too on side 2, first track. And see, we lived in a townhouse back then, and my younger brother, it was always the battle of the stereos. And so there's this battle that went on, and you got the bigger amp, and so I think initially when I didn't like Rush as much because of Zeppelin and stuff, it's because he was jamming all this Rush, and one of them he got 12 before I knew about it, and then started to change my mind there. And I remember many high school nights of Passage to Bangkok and that whole album being played. But for the band, the studio left them alone after that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was it.
That's the point.
They could do what they wanted to do.
Yeah, they dug in and did what they had to do, and it worked. Surprisingly, it worked. And for something as theatrical as the first side of that album is, but there's also, and maybe this gets overlooked in history, and I'm looking at it obviously being born after that album came out, but loving that album. There's obviously a sense of very real rebellion, in that entire first side, right? And there's also a number of bands that were around at the same time that are, sort of running into that same sort of thematic thing, but not on such a theatrical level necessarily, short of maybe Pink Floyd to some degree. So I think that there was something there that just worked with obviously, especially a younger male audience in particular. And it's not even that it's it's heavy, or that it doesn't have that sort of, sex appeal, quote unquote, that some of the other music did. But I think again that it's just heady enough and just rebellious enough that it drew all those sides together, at least for that one album, and it really worked in a very interesting way. I'm sure that there are people that wish it was a little easier to skip through those tracks sometimes, even on a record, as opposed to it all running one side. But it plays out well.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I don't necessarily put on 2112 as I'm driving around town or anything, but you kind of get in. It's almost like appointment listening. It's like, okay, tonight I think I'm going to sit out on the deck and I'm going to put on 2112 and I'm going to enjoy a couple of glasses of whiskey before we get through side A of the album. and just approach it that way, because it's not something that you can just kind of snack on. You really have to digest the whole thing at once.
That's true. That's a good point. And the sound, with the title 2112, it spoke to what I think you mentioned, Alan, earlier, the science fiction cutting edge kind of mythical thing that he wrote about and they played about. And then just the guitar sound. I mean, it's that Alex Lifeson type of distortion.
Yep.
It's really something. So it never gets old. It never will.
Yeah.
Little predicting the future thing going on in there too, I think. It just happened a little earlier.
Yeah.
So.
I didn't know Orwell was in the lyrics.
Right. No, well, so I mentioned the thing about, maybe not being, heavy or having that sort of sex appeal, but I will say, again, as I said before, I got into trying to find a job doing this legally, was listening to that and doing some woodworking and drinking moonshine. Literally, for me, like the Temples of Syrinx, very much so, the feeling that I have from that is the exact same feeling that I get if I go listen to, and it sounds weird, but truthfully, because it can kind of get you going, but Pantera, 5 minutes alone. There's an emotional thing that happens there, that sort of anger, that rebellion, who are you to tell me, those sort of things, and it works on an emotional level for me in that same way. So,
yeah. Well, and one thing that came out of the 2112 album was the Starman logo. And that came to represent I think as Neil explained it, the individual against the masses, the individual thought process versus the group think. Is that, you guys remember that the same way?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of became something that, at least the fans of the band adopted for them as the band's logo. Again, that whole concept of the individual against the group think, very relevant in 2022.
I have a really, really bad tattoo that I did to myself, being all white trashy the way that I am, on my right forearm, which is "The meek shall inherit the earth."
Yes.
Obviously twofold for a reason. So, but that was definitely the latter inspiration.
Yeah.
So.
What's interesting about the original translation of "The meek shall inherit the earth," in the closest original you can get, it actually says, "Those who carry swords and choose to sheathe them will inherit the earth." A very different meaning. It's interesting.
Very cool. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Not to get all biblical on you guys.
No.
We can do that. We may need another pour here, but we can definitely do that.
Right. That becomes that's your definite side B of a 4 LP.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I every now and then I'll think, or I'll ask somebody, if you could have a dinner party and invite 3 guests, who would you invite, living or dead? And I've often thought that I would like to have Neil and C.S. Lewis as two of those guests. And I'm not sure who the third one's going to be, but I think that would be a pretty fascinating conversation to sit in on. To just sit there and pour drinks and make sure everybody had plenty to eat. But just listening to those guys talk about philosophy and different perspectives on the way the world works and the way people work.
Yeah.
That'd
be a hard choice, because to pick three people, we'd have to go by categories.
Right.
Like
think of so many different folks, that you'd love to sit across from.
Yeah.
I was running through that in my head just musically, and I don't know. I'd have a hard time.
Well, one has to be Hendrix. Sorry.
Yeah, I honestly.
If he would play, he'd have to play a little bit.
Right. I think Bon Scott has to be part of that conversation for me, because I just don't think he had a chance to get everything out that he could have possibly gotten out. So
no, he did himself in, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But that'd be a hard list to do. But that should be another show.
That would be another show. That will be another show. I promise you. And we'll have 3 or 4 different categories.
Yeah, at least start with the music category, and we venture a couple.
Yeah. There's a supergroups show. Create your own supergroup coming up at some point. So anyway, let's move on to moving pictures.
And pretty definitive.
Yeah, and one little tidbit that I'll throw out that I learned in the last couple of weeks while I was doing a little research for this show. The guy moving the picture in the little red jumpsuit, the one on the far left, is also this man who we are seeing his bare buttocks.
Wow, that's pretty wild. Is he a member of their crew or something? Or
he's I got his name here somewhere. Bobby King. He was a guy named Bobby King that Hugh Syme knew, who designed every cover for Rush from the Caress of Steel album all the way through Clockwork Angels.
Oh wow, I didn't know that history.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
And he is. Let me see. Hang on. I don't think I have all of the album art up here, but this guy Bobby King was the Starman on 2112. He is the Naked Man on the Hemispheres album, Standing on the Brain. He is moving the guy on the far left, moving the picture and moving pictures, and he's also on the live album Exit Stage Left.
That's a piece of Rush history I never knew.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that they kind of worked all of that in. But this album cover is Hugh Syme, who again was the guy that designed it and photographed it. He said that this is a triple entendre because you actually have men moving the pictures. You have the people on the far right of the album cover who are in tears because they are moved by the pictures. And then if you flip the album over, the cover art on the back is people filming the album cover being created into a moving picture. So you got to love Rush and the creativity that they put into even the album covers. So, but enough on the album cover. Let's talk about what's actually on that album itself. Alan, what are your thoughts on the album Moving Pictures?
That is, in my opinion, one of those albums, and obviously a little biased, that being one of the first albums that I ever owned, but that's one of those albums that is eminently listenable from front to back, and production value alone on that album. You'll hear a lot of people talk about, for example, Dark Side of the Moon, and sitting down and listening to Dark Side of the Moon on headphones and really listening to every note, listening to the production value all the way through. You can do the same thing with Moving Pictures, because the way that all the instruments and the vocals are captured on that, not only the songs and what those songs, the meanings of the songs, and obviously the popularity still to this day of many of those songs, but just actually listening to and listening through to the actual just production and the way that things are being mic'd and the way that they're being mixed and the way that everything sort of comes together as a cohesive unit. It's just an absolutely beautiful album.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it gets the credit production wise there as far as that production goes that maybe it should. I don't feel like it gets talked about on that kind of level. But yeah, sit down and listen to it and hi-fi with some headphones on, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, every track I love every track. And there's always the ones, Limelight and Tom Sawyer, but, and YYZ, of course.
Yeah.
Or as they said, YYZ. But they recorded that up there at Le Studio up there in the, cold landscape up there in Canada. And that studio is like really defunct and a ruin now. It's really kind of sad.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a YouTube video of it floating around out there that I saw where somebody was kind of exploring it. Now that it's abandoned.
You'd think somebody with some wherewithal would want to save that as a piece of, because other bands recorded there too. April Wine recorded there, and others. So, but
you maybe think the Canadian government, would want to step in and take care of their greatest export of all time, which is Rush, and sort of national landmark that thing.
Yeah, they should. But have you seen the footage of them recording in there? There's a couple of videos that are really cool. Limelight and Tom Sawyer. Yeah. It's classic because it's just and back to the bass lines Getty's playing there, like he's talked about. It's just, I mean, just as much as 2112. I don't know. Maybe it's a different album, but it may be their best album in many ways.
Yeah.
It has to be in contention. I mean, it's by far I think even more than, like you said, 2112. I think it's their most popular album as far as what, like if people aren't a deep Rush fan, if they think Rush, they're definitely going to think Tom Sawyer, which is on the album, and probably Limelight's probably going to be in the conversation. So, that's one of those conversations like talking to a Metallica fan and saying, probably Black is probably their best album, right? You're just asking to get punched by somebody eventually.
Well, it did open the door to a lot of other people to Rush. I think they gained a fan base because it crossed over a bit, those songs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it went platinum within a couple of weeks of being released. And it just, they started out that tour in, small venues, and then they're in, playing big arenas when they come back through the same city. So that really put the band on the map in a lot of ways. I think 2112 opened the door for them to do what they wanted to do, and then Moving Pictures kind of not only opened the door, they kicked in the door and announced their presence with authority.
Kicked in the door and plugged in the synths.
Yeah. Well, that Limelight solo, Alex's solo on that is always, it's one of those abstract solos. And back when they toured the anniversary of that album, I guess it was the 30th anniversary, probably. I knew I had to go, so I saw them here in Virginia at an outdoor amphitheater, and then in the wintertime when they came back through Baltimore, I drove up to Baltimore and saw them indoors because I wanted to hear that album. They played it in the middle of the set, front to back. It was pretty great, And Witch Hunt, we mentioned earlier, was a huge hit of that night, and I feel good after that he's gone that I got to see them play that front to back twice.
Yeah, that was one of the first concerts that Kim and I went to. Was that 30th anniversary concert, and so I love YYZ. That's one of those songs, just a driving song as far as I'm concerned. And I love Alex's little solos in YYZ. Just it's nothing fancy, but it definitely gives that sort of sensation of aviation for sure. Because it's so high up in the mix as well when it comes in.
Well, that bridge, that big bridge solo where he just the hammer-ons and pull-offs that he does all the way up the neck, they're beautiful.
On that album, you mentioned YYZ, so let's talk a little bit about instrumentals, because that was obviously a pretty big part of Rush's work. You have a favorite?
Jacob's Ladder is definitely in there. YYZ is definitely honestly, YYZ is probably my favorite out of those. And the live versions of YYZ in particular, I really enjoy, because to me that song always felt like when they played that song, I don't feel like they were playing that song for anybody who was in the audience. They were playing that song for themselves, and it gave them a chance to kind of to stretch, no matter what era they were in. Yep. So
there's a later one called Hope that's a short acoustic song that I listened to recently that I like.
Yeah, off the Snakes and Arrows album. There are actually 3 instrumentals on that album. And we may get more into that album later, but to me, the instrumentals are probably maybe the best songs on the album. I really like Malignant Narcissism. I think that's pretty fantastic. And then, but my favorite may be La Via Strangiato off the Hemispheres album.
Oh yeah,
that is it's just killer. And again, it just shows off all the talent of the band members individually, and then how well they blend together. So
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that song. We couldn't leave that one out. That's a good point.
Yeah. All right, so let's go to our third pour, and then we'll talk a little bit more about a couple things, and then we'll get out of here. Alan, what do you have?
So I'm not going to pour this one because I know better than to mix my poisons, and I've been drinking absinthe all night. But one of my favorite Rush songs, and it's a version of a Rush song, is the acoustic version of Resist. And if I've had a particularly rough day, I will come home and open a bottle of cask strength apple brandy from my Christmas barrel, as I call it, and sit down and have a pour of that and listen to that acoustic version. And I might listen to that song 3 or 4 times in a row and just sort of try to work through that and get it out of my system.
Okay. All right. Steve.
Well, we think of Canada, we think of rye. And I think of, many years ago when we were working with Dave Pickrell, he told me about the deal he'd made on all this Canadian rye that would become Whistle Pig. I remember him telling me that story, and he jokingly said, I think the guy I bought it from must have lost his job because David scored such a stash and such a deal. I don't know if that's one of Dave's exaggeration stories, because Dave's stories grew over time, but he told that story. So I just have some Whistle Pig. If I get it in the right,
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah. I have something that I probably can't say much about the source of it, but it is a little something that pulled together, and then I named it Time Stands Still. That's one of my favorite Rush songs as well. So for a lot of reasons, especially as you do, when I was a younger man and I listened to that song, I thought, oh yeah, that's good. As a much older man and I listen to that song, it's like, boy, that really hits every single time it comes on. So that is off of the power. No, not Hold Your Fire. Hold Your Fire. Hold Your Fire.
Hold Your Fire. Yeah.
So cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, that's that is one of those songs too, sort of like talking about Clockwork Angels, where maybe in 5 years I'll come back around to it. But I was like that with that song for a long time, where it just didn't have that kind of meaning to me, and it's not until recently in the past couple years it started to have some deeper meaning to it, other than imitating some amount of 80s pop sensibility with emotion. So, but it works on a different level now. So.
Yeah. A moment to spend passing an evening with a drink and a friend. So Tim has thrown out here Whiskey Acres Blue Popcorn, paired with Everyday Glory. All right. Going deep on both. All right.
Yes.
I like it. I like it. I like it. All right. So let me throw this graphic up here again for reference purposes, in case you need it. What album don't you like?
Well, Presto, I think I didn't get into a lot, and Snakes and Arrows, not some of it, but not as much.
Okay. Alan?
There's a few of them. Presto is definitely on that list. I think that one again, the height of the Hamer guitar, to some degree or another. And then again, Clockwork Angels is still hard for me. And again, it's not bad. And I don't know if there's any that I just flat don't like. I think, and this is one of those things I think again is beautiful about Rush. Some of them you just have to be in a certain frame of mind, I think, to understand. And some of them I still think I have to grow into to some degree or another. Some of that late 80s stuff, definitely, I don't know that I'll ever grow into some of that stuff. But so I don't know that I can point out anyone that I can say that I just definitively don't like at the moment. So
yeah, I'll defend Presto a little bit. That was really the return of the guitar on Rush's albums. It was also their first album with a new producer, Rupert Hine. He did Presto and he did Roll the Bones.
Yep.
And I think
I love Roll the Bones, by the way.
Yeah,
absolutely do.
So there are several songs on Presto that I like. A lot of, well, if you read enough of history and reviews and such, there are ranking Rush albums. You'll see one guy that says real Rush fans really hate this album, and then the next guy that you read talks about real Rush fans really love the same album. So again, you have to like what you like and be okay with that, and be okay with the fact that somebody else may not. Some people, for some unconceivable reason, they don't like you too. So
I heard that. I read that somewhere recently.
And I don't get it.
Listen, all I'm going to say is that same guy had an Irish whiskey historian come to his defense and agree with him, which by proxy makes me an Irish hero. So,
all right. So Tim's coming to my defense a little bit on Presto. Yeah,
I'll have to revisit it again. It's been a while.
It's not going to be on my, probably not in my top 10 of Rush albums, but I like it fine. And again, the guitars coming back was pretty big for me. I guess that if there were two that I really struggled with, it would be Signals and Grace Under Pressure.
Signals is definitely on that list for me too.
The keyboards just went too far. I think there's some really good songs on both, but
well, the two on Grace Under Pressure, Red Sector A has deep meaning.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that one a lot.
And the live version of that, there's some from that era. Find that and watch them play because they have pyrotechnics on it and stuff. It's he's playing more the electric drums. He's got a kit that rotated, which is really cool. That tour because he'd be playing one side between songs. You see the acoustic drums; it all rotate. So check that out again, Kevin. At least that one song.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think Red Sector A is one of the highlights of that album.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at Signals, you've got Subdivision and New World Man are obviously the bigger hits off of there. I think Chemistry is a really good song, but it's the Weapon is part of that Fear trilogy that Rush had. But all in all, I've got to be very intentional if I'm putting either of those albums on.
Yeah,
because the keyboard aspect is just a little too dominant for me, and I don't mind the keyboards on some of the other albums, but it just went a little bit too far in my estimation. But
I agree. I think, and I mentioned this with, moving pictures too, being so beautifully produced. Those albums to me, it's not just the keyboards, it's also the production factor. There's almost like the recordings themselves are kind of airy to me.
Mhm.
There's not a depth to the recording itself.
Mhm.
It's very, for lack of any better word, digital, right?
Right.
It doesn't seem to have that sort of living analog thing that was going on prior to that, in my opinion.
Yeah. There was not a lot of punch in either of those albums, I
Yes.
didn't think.
Yeah.
And that was one of the complaints that I think the band had about um, uh, Presto and Roll the Bones, both of which were produced by Rupert Hine. They didn't get the punch on the studio album like they were able to generate when they were on tour.
Yeah.
And so
listen to those, like I said, those bootlegs of the Roll the Bones tour afterwards, and listen to the version of the Roll the Bones on those bootlegs, and it's a big difference, even with the audio quality not being great.
Yeah. Other albums that are near and dear to your heart.
I love Fly By Night, and I also love the self-titled Rush album. Like, it's still, even with John Rutsky being the original drummer, if Working Man comes on, I'm going to try to sing it terribly. It's just, there's no way you can't. How could you not? It's such an eminently, again, that Led Zeppelin thing, it's there. It's obviously, the influence is very on the nose, but it's still just a great song, and it's something that people can identify with very easily. And just a fantastic guitar riff, very basic guitar riff, but a fantastic one.
Yeah. How about you, Steve?
I liked some of Snakes and Arrows, and particularly the song "Working Them Angels."
Yep.
I mean, that song really moves me. And
I agree.
And then I also like on Counterparts the song "Animate," and on the live DVD from Live from Frankfurt, they open up with "Animate," and watch that sometime. That's a powerful track.
Yep, it is. I've seen that. It is really good. And I would echo uh, the comment on Counterparts. I think that may be one of the most underrated Rush albums. If there is such a
thing. That was the first one that that was like mine, as far as like I bought that, and that was the one that was like, this is my version of Rush. And even Test for Echo, I love Test for Echo too. I particularly Driven, I'll throw that one out there. It's just it was obviously the single they released from that, but I love the lyrics to that song. And ironically, if you're a guitar player, that we'll tie back into Black Sabbath here, it's the exact same riff as Supernaut, it's just played backwards.
And another one, and we've touched a little bit on it, but Permanent Waves, that's a strong one as well. They really the band got into, and they say it wasn't intentional, and we'll take them at their word, but they got into songs that were more radio friendly at that point, and ironically enough, Spirit of Radio was one of those first songs that really fit airplay, and that's a fantastic song in and of itself. And Free Will, which might be one of my favorite Rush songs ever, is also on there. Entre Nous is on there.
Great. Yeah.
It's just fantastic. So again, there's it's hard to go wrong with that album. And it was like the momentum started with 2112, and it just kind of kept rolling, and then the calendar flipped over from the 70s to the 80s, and Permanent Waves came out, and that really just set the table for moving pictures, and Rush was off and running at a sprint at that point.
Yeah, well, and then there's a line in Spirit of Radio that you just mentioned as well that I think is ties all these sort of things together, from the different tastes in music, the different tastes in the eras of Rush's music,
Mhm.
to Neil Peart's great, lyric writing. And it's that whole idea of, the line, all this machinery making modern music and still be open hearted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a little something very special in that line in general, and we talked about music being personal. Um, you don't have to like it for it to mean something very special to somebody else, right?
Right.
And for it to have that depth to it. And I
Right.
think that's part of the beauty of that particular song in general, and being able to get that played on the radio.
Right.
Yeah.
And good music, like good whiskey, to again make the correlation. It can mean something special to you that won't mean the same thing to anybody else, but somebody else, it will be special to them for an entirely different reason. And all of those reasons are completely valid. And so let's just all gather around the fact that we've got something that is meaningful, and that is important to us, or carries some significance, and not really worry about the the why, or whether somebody else agrees with you. Let's just enjoy it for what it is, and let that experience kind of buoy our spirits.
Definitely. Yeah. That was uplifting.
I mean, what it
Free
really,
will lyrics on Free Will are really, I remember at that age too, what that, called out to you as
Mhm.
a young person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Alan.
what it really all boils down to is that U2 is a terrible band. I mean, let the hate
Right.
mail begin. Sorry.
Well, we could always talk about Tiny Tim, but that's another era. So, and Tiptoe Through the Tulips on the Carson Show many moons ago. If you want to see something extremely weird, look that up on YouTube.
Yes, that is very weird. That is very weird.
I've watched that. I was doing a weird thing earlier. And this doesn't not tied to Rush at all. I'm sorry. Sorry, I ruined your music show, Kevin, with the YouTube joke. I was looking up weird acoustic covers earlier, and I found an acoustic cover of My Pony, of all things. You don't realize how good of a song that really is until you see a guy really pour his heart out on an acoustic guitar about, asking someone to ride his pony, and then suddenly just kind of clicks.
Well, it takes all kinds. It takes all
I know.
kinds.
I know.
Well, we've been at this for about an hour and a half, so I want to give you guys an opportunity to comment on any other aspects of Rush that you want to. If there's anything you wanted to share that you haven't had a chance to yet.
So I'll share this too. So Kim and I we got to see Rush together twice. One time was actually during our honeymoon, and that was her idea. So that was super cool. She was also pregnant.
Good woman.
So
Good woman.
Yeah.
Yep.
it was technically Penny's first concert, and my daughter absolutely loves Rush. If Rush
Awesome.
comes on, radio's going up. The other thing I want to throw out too, obviously, recently, and you guys did a show on Taylor Hawkins passing away from the Foo Fighters, but I think one of the reasons that I love the Foo Fighters myself is because I hear so much of Rush in there, especially in a song like Rope, right? So we may never get another Rush album, and we may never get another Foo Fighters album, but there's things out there to explore that you can pick up on that. There's sections in music that are, and that again is a great example. Foo Fighters Rope. There's an entire section in there that could have easily have been a Rush instrumental. Without Dave Grohl's vocals there, you put it on, and you might be convinced it's Rush.
I was just thinking about, for those who haven't seen it, to, if you can't tonight, watch that on YouTube. Rush having dinner.
Yes.
I just we talked about the humility, the humor, the camaraderie, the friendships, and it's just a beautiful thing to watch, particularly with Neil gone. And secondly, that recent interview, and that with Alex and Getty, really, you could feel they needed it, and they had the right interviewer, and that makes all the difference. There's interviewers that can bring stuff out in people, like, for instance, if Alan wanted to talk to Bono or something, I'm sure he could bring a lot out in him, and the edge.
Get a reaction.
Yeah, that'd be a good interview. But check those out, because we talked a lot about it, but it's always wonderful. It's one of the modern age affords us the ability to look at old footage.
Yeah.
And it's, as much as technology can be a pain, it's one of the, things I enjoy at home at the end of the evening is to dig for old music and things.
Absolutely.
Check it out.
I'll throw one more in there too. It's kind of a deep dive for people who are really into Rush. Obviously, the band has said many times that there's not a lot of unreleased stuff, right? And if it was unreleased, it was unreleased for a reason.
Right.
Seems like a lot of the bands that I like that tends to be the case. There is a set of Power Windows demos that are out and that are on YouTube that you can listen to, and it's the entire set of demos. It's the only album worth of demos I've ever seen leak of anything of Rush's like that. And it's worth a listen. It's not great. It's not great audio, but it's worth a listen for sure.
No, it's
that song "Big Money" would fit today, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, the whole album was about power and different kinds of power, and again, a lot of the stuff for Rush is like classic literature. It is timeless in many ways. The keyboard songs may not necessarily be timeless musically, but lyrically, definitely.
They're really just missing the duet with Bono. Is
yeah. Just keep
Kevin's gonna punch me.
Look. We're gonna have a time at some point, Alan, where we're gonna sit down and we're gonna listen to the Clockwork Angels album together, and we're gonna listen to the best of U2. And
that's fine. I will sing to "She Moves in Mysterious Ways" very badly.
Awesome.
But
will you dance? But you will dance like the the woman that would become the Edge's wife would dance.
Probably depends on how much I've been drinking and what it was.
Listen to Vandy Man's Land with Edge singing that. That's a traditional Irish song. It's the opening of the Rattle and Hum movie. That's nice.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's some really good stuff over that, but that was probably Rush, or excuse me, U2 at its most pretentious. But again, that's another show for another day.
Yeah.
So we started this out talking about this being the 10th anniversary of the Clockwork Angels album. The last song on that album is called "The Garden," and these are just some of the lyrics out of there that I wanted to pull and share those with everybody. And the measure of a life is a measure of love and respect, so hard to earn, so easily burned. In the fullness of time, a garden to nurture and protect. The future disappears into memory with only a moment between, forever dwells in that moment. Hope is what remains to be seen in the fullness of time. A garden to nurture and protect. It's a measure of a life. And that was the last lyric of the last studio album that we had from Rush, and the last lyric from Neil Peart. And very fitting and very poignant. And again, me reading it doesn't do it any justice. So be sure to go back and listen to that. I will have a playlist that will accompany the show, and it'll be some of the songs that Steve and Alan talked about, as well as some of the things that are special to me. So be sure to check that out. I'll post this on Facebook and such within the next couple of days. So just be on the lookout for that. All right. So guys, anything else tonight?
It's a great deal of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate being on it. Yeah, it's nice to talk about this, and hope I can join you all again at some point.
Absolutely, we will definitely need to make that happen, Steve, and have you on a full blown episode of Bourbon Turntable, and just talk more specifically about what you're doing there at Mount Vernon, and more generally about what you love in music. So.
Thank you.
So as we're getting ready to sign off, Steve, tell people where they can find you on social media.
Well, I'm on Facebook at Steve Bashore, and I'm on Instagram at Bashore64. I don't Twitter a lot or anything like that. And MountVernon.org is a good website to check out for everything Mount Vernon. And there is a distillery and gristmill page there that keeps you up to date on the history and what's been happening. So tune in there. It's also check out if you're in the area, the calendar of events, because tourism's coming back really strong right now. So there's a lot going on this summer and fall.
Mm-hmm.
So check out MountVernon.org.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Alan Bishop, where can people find you?
I don't know. spiritsfrenchlick.com, alchemistcabinet.wordpress.com. You can buy all of our products from Sillbox.com. You can also check me out on all my various social medias, none of which I have memorized in any way, shape, or form. And check out the new distilling video series that I'm working on, One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, where I mess up things so that you don't have to. Sort of catered towards both home distillers and professional distillers, with the idea that eventually home distillers will become professional distillers. And then Distillers Talk, the show that I co-host with Christy Atkinson, usually on a weekly basis.
Yes, it's a very good show. Very good show. Bourbon Turntable. You can find us on YouTube. If you're watching tonight, you're probably there. You can also find our shows on your favorite podcast platform, as long as that is Apple, Spotify, or Google. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram, and even a little bit on Twitter. And our next show will be, we've got Robert Licorice joining us from Iron Root Republic. That show will be out next Wednesday, so be on the lookout for that. That was a lot of fun. We actually recorded that show a couple days ago, and we had a great time talking with Robert and Josh Galladay, who is the brand rep for Iron Root. He was on there with us, and we had a really good time talking to them, catching up on what was going on at their distillery, and talking a little bit about music as well. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, I want to thank Steve and Alan for joining us. And cheers, love, and free bird.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, guys. Love y'all.
Thank you, guys.